Thank you. For those that came over from the initial overview session, thank you for joining the continuation of the LF Edge End User Kickoff series. For this session, we have Jason Shippard as well as Obi from Schlumberger, who will be presenting a fireside chat around leveraging open source to accelerate digital transformation in oil and gas. Jason, I'll hand it over.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Brett, and thanks, Obi, for joining us. I appreciate you providing your insights here. And so maybe we'll start if you want to do a quick introduction of your background, kind of what led you to Schlumberger, and of course now you're working, helping to drive things at Agora as part of your efforts. Kind of a little background would be great.
All right. So I'm Obinna Ilochonwu, but you don't want to get tongue twisted. Just call me Obi. Not Obi-Wan Kenobi, just Obi. Okay. So I've been with Schlumberger for time flies, about 20 years now. I started off as a software engineer in Houston, and if you know anything about Schlumberger, we move around a lot. So I went from a software engineer in Houston to working on real-time systems in the UK, and then I led a team of, I guess it wasn't IoT then, but you might as well call it IoT, a bunch of real-time systems engineers in Canada. And then I moved to HR for 2 years, and I came back to Houston in a technical role. So my background is really about real-time systems, how we can connect, things on the well site to the cloud or data center that it was called in those days, and do stuff with it. So I'm currently looking after the IoT architecture for Schlumberger and working very closely with Agora, which I'll talk more about when we get into it.
Great. Yeah, and like you said, you've been doing IoT way longer than it was fashionable to call it IoT, and now of course, Edge is the big conversation, and IoT would be considered a subset of that, and so we'll kind of dive in. But so tell me, obviously, you know the industry really well. You've been working, as you mentioned, with Schlumberger a long time, and we'll dive more in on Agora. But what are you seeing as some of the biggest opportunities and challenges in the oil and gas space? In present times, of course, there's a lot of macro trends going on, but kind of what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges for you guys, and where you see opportunities as well?
Yes, I guess as everybody knows, this year is one for the records. So sometimes it's difficult to see opportunities within challenges, but I think they are now listed, right? So this year has been a double whammy, right? Oil prices tanked, and it was a mixture of increased supply because of the surplus of oil, and reduced demand because of the reduction in activity because of COVID. So this was just a seismic shock to the industry, right? And so most of the oil and gas companies reduced their workforce to accommodate that. And in addition to the reduction in workforce, you also had scenarios where even with your reduced workforce, you couldn't really send personnel to the well site because of COVID. So, how does an oil and gas service company that, delivers services through people and data do business without those, right? So that was a big challenge for us and most other oil companies. So the solution was really to find a way to optimize the processes and the people's capabilities. So pretty much turn these people into superheroes. And how do you do that? One is by getting them, being able to do things they were doing before, but having to do them in a more efficient way. So optimize operations, do remote operations, have automation of workflows and processes, and really, have a mechanism to turn data into knowledge. So moving them from looking at squiggly lines to being able to turn those squiggly lines into intelligent alerts, into insights that really help them do a better job. So we have scenarios where instead of having one engineer looking at a well, if you're able to automate things and make things, so that you draw the attention to where it's really required, you can have an engineer looking at 5, 10, 20 wells. So really, optimizing that path. And also for reduction in trips to the well site, there's no reason to send human beings to the well site to update firmware, to troubleshoot. If you can have that, the advantages of what the edge gives you, then you can leverage that to prevent, people going to the well site and exposing themselves to all kinds of issues. And then the last one is really about data, right? So data is the new oil for us, and it's about finding ways to digitize data, to digitize the well site. So digital transformation journey, which I'll mention later on, is something that both Agora and Schlumberger have really pursued, and it's really helps us to get data to experts. When I say experts, experts here don't, it's not just human beings, but experts could be agents, automated agents, software agents, and having data to those agents and having those agents add value to the data, share data, collaborate it, and break the silos that normally exist within the oil and gas industry. So in general, the challenges have forced us to look inwards to leverage digital transformation to help us meet this current scenarios we're in today.
That makes sense. And we've seen a lot of conversation across a bunch of markets. How the obviously it's highly unfortunate, the pandemic, but it's been like a huge accelerator for digital transformation across the board. I've seen one way someone put it in a study was the 4 stages of investment in the COVID area. Number 1 is keep the business going. Work some of the things you were saying in oil and gas, get curbside checkout going, get Zoom spun up for folks. And then the second one is fix all the security problems you created by rushing the first one, and make it more robust. The third one is go reinvent yourself so that when this happens again, because unfortunately we'll likely see something like this again. How do I be more resilient? And then the last one is kind of general technology refresh. So we've seen that kind of cycle across the board, but definitely interesting and how you guys are approaching it. So you touched on IoT and edge and already, but do you see kind of specific to edge computing? How do you see edge computing really being an enabler for your strategy to kind of comprehend a lot of the challenges that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just something on the last point is that we've seen lots of projects we have that had a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year timeline being condensed in 6 months, to address the challenges here, right? So it's really helped us do all the things we knew we needed to do before, but really focus on making them done now. So that's what this this environment has created. Now to your question about what we've seen on the edge. So for us, the edge or IoT story is really just one part of the digital transformation journey. And if you permit me, I would like to just read an excerpt from our CEO. He was at the Barclays CEO Energy Conference in 2020, and he really hit the nail on the head. And I'll just read what an excerpt from his speech said. Digital transformation is imperative and represents our industry's greatest opportunity for value creation during this decade. The pandemic has created a catalyst to accelerate adoption of digital applications and cloud technology. However, our digital future depends upon our ability to deploy data analytics and workflow applications at scale across offices and operations, independent of geographical boundaries. The winners will leverage a trusted digital platform with deep domain knowledge to create a step change in resource efficiency and asset performance. So what is really saying here is that Schlumberger and most oil companies are going all in with digital transformation. It's not every business unit now in Schlumberger has a digital transformation objective. No ifs and buts. So with that comes, well, data comes from somewhere. It comes from your physical devices, from your equipment. So you have to go backwards. You have to go southbound to the edge. So the Schlumberger has really put his money where his mouth is in terms of the IoT and edge computing. So one of the things we've done is we've created a venture called Agora, and think of it as a startup within Schlumberger with the main focus of looking at IoT and edge opportunities. So think of it as really the IoT platform for oil and gas that we have in Schlumberger, and it's not just for internal Schlumberger; it's really actually for external companies and businesses outside Schlumberger. And what we've seen here is that things have changed. As Charles, the CTO for Industrial Internet Consortium said, is that the pendulum is shifting. It used to be, again, in the past decade, it's grown from edge to cloud, but, it's now in the cloud, and the pendulum is shifting back to the edge, closer to where the data is. A couple of reasons. One is, the restrictions on people. Lots of companies and countries actually having restrictions on data leaving their boundaries. because surprise, surprise, data is the new oil. Data is valuable, and people are realizing that the data is a precious commodity. So there's some restrictions in having data just flow up to the cloud. And also, there's been an exponential increase in the amount of data we generated in the edge. So both structured and unstructured data. So how do you get all that data from the edge to the cloud? Actually, why do you need to do that? So the edge computing is really something that we're looking at to address those needs. Then something else is that, as mentioned, 20 years ago, we're doing IoT before it was called IoT. And one of my first jobs then was, looking at, real-time systems to get data from downhole pumps, aggregate them and send them to a data center in the cloud, and then have human beings, work on optimizing processes and sending back control or instructions to the well site. Well, fast forward now, the well site is now the new, it's now the edge. The data center is the cloud, and these algorithms want to run on the cloud. Well, we're moving them to the edge. So now I can have, my edge compute on the well site, getting vibration data from the pumps and detecting patterns. If it sees that there's high vibration, it can infer that maybe there's sand being ingested in the pump, slow down the pump, wait till that phase expires, and then speed up the pump again. So we're seeing a lot of applications for edge compute. And apart from just the processes itself, previously in the past, if I had to change my algorithm on the cloud, I would have to send some poor bloke to the well site to update the firmware. Now I can do it remotely and at scale. That's the key point, at scale, with IoT on the edge. So these are some of the cases, that have really made us as a company realize that, we need to really embrace and develop solutions really for the edge, or else we'll be left behind in the digital transformation journey.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and like you said, it starts with an outcome, and then you had to kind of back in and get increased focus on IoT and edge. And I've seen a lot of architectural diagrams for IoT or otherwise that have this massive back end and cloud and hubs and repositories and data lakes and whatever, and then at the bottom it's this tiny little box that says sensors and gateways. Yeah. And when I see that, I'm like, you haven't actually done an IoT project, because that's really hard to get quality data out in the field. As you said, how do you scale it? How do you make sure things are running properly, securely, and all that? So, I mean, having that as a core focus, is clearly important. I mean, it's all important, but if you don't have quality data, you're not going to get very good information, out of it. So, and then I think trust is a big conversation going forward. But so with what you're working on, how do you see open source fitting into your overall strategy, from an Agora standpoint, broader Schlumberger, of course, as well?
Yeah, so Schlumberger is known for many things. We're the largest oil and gas, not to blow a trumpet here, but the largest oil and gas services company in the world. We are known for our technology, we're known for our safety record. But one thing we're never known for was being open source. It was not something that we talked about, because again, we have lots of IP we've created over the decades, and there's a little bit of, keeping things to our close to our chest. In 2019, that changed. I mean, the world exploded. We have a software platform called Delphi. It's one of our largest software efforts in Schlumberger, and it's really the digital environment for all the domains for oil and gas. So think of it like as your Office 365 on steroids for oil and gas domain. That's what it was. And Schlumberger in 2019 contributed the data ecosystem that drove Delphi to the market. I mean, this was unheard of. Schlumberger doesn't do that, And we contributed to OSDU, which is the open surface subsurface data universe. And it's it's really an organization of really all the majors, the Exxons, the Chevrons, Shells of the world, the IT providers, the Microsofts, the Amazons of the world, and we contributed this to the open surface data universe. This was a seismic shift in Schlumberger. We don't do things like that, and so it opened up the floodgates, where people started thinking, well, now the floodgates are open. What does open source mean? How do we leverage this new thing, I mean, new to Schlumberger? How do you leverage this new thing, and how do we capitalize on that to, to accelerate, and also to have more, involvement in the market? So This was huge for us. Then Agora, as I said, which is like a small startup within Schlumberger, what do startups do? Startups don't have, the benefit of huge resources. And so Agora is also looking at how to leverage that open source community to be able to accelerate its own solutions and to keep itself fresh. So in fact, Agora 2 months ago contributed the Agora Edge SDK binaries to the public. Again, it's not we haven't yet gone up open source, but at least the binaries are there. And this is one step. This is one step towards that realization that you can do more by leveraging the people and what they're doing to be able to move forward. So that's I would say that it's the open source strategy is unfolding in Schlumberger, and it's unfolding in pretty much every center we go to. There's a discussion now about how do we either contribute to open source or how do we leverage that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, what ultimately matters is the domain knowledge that you guys have. There's a lot of IP that you can generate, but creating a network effect around that nucleus and driving ecosystems, is foundational. And I mean, it's great to hear about the experience with Schlumberger and now with Agora, and we're seeing that kind of translate with a bunch of different markets, in kind of real time. And then Agora, of course, a big part of what you guys are doing. You mentioned open source, but also it's kind of around driving an ecosystem around your investments. Correct?
Yes. So it's if you look at what Agora has done, for example, with Project Eve, initially when we started with the Edge, most architects again will have a slide and will have containers and microservices and move forward. But the oil and gas industry is still quite a very conservative one. So we do have a lot of systems. We call them value-added black boxes. Nobody knows how it works. Nobody wants to refactor them, but it generates revenue, and nobody wants to refactor them. So we're stuck with a scenario where not everybody has drank the container Kool-Aid, and so we need to ask ourselves, how do we support this world, the modern world of microservices and containers, and at the same time, support these legacy systems that are still value added that really nobody wants to touch. How do we do them at scale? So this led us to ZEDEDA. They introduced us to Project Eve, which we've been evaluating for, I guess, last year or so, and it really was a good fit for us because we've seen that now this ability to manage these different loads at scale was something that we could we could do. We could turn that into an IT project really, and being able to do this at scale to benefit Agora. So that's really something that was very I guess very instrumental to Agora's way of thinking moving forward.
It makes sense. Yeah, the legacy support, being able to run virtual machines, and constrained devices out in the field is definitely a big value prop for Eve. What other things kind of were attractive to you from an Eve standpoint, as part of your overall strategy?
Yeah, the other thing was also around. So again, Schlumberger, Agora is a small startup, but there's still the backing of Schlumberger there. So we still think, we still have some of the big company mindsets. And one of the things that really scared us actually was we saw Project Eve was good. We saw ZEDEDA was a company that was making waves, but we're still that thing about, well, if ZEDEDA were to disappear today, what happens? Do we lose all the investment we made in them? And really the idea of Project Eve and LF Edge as a community where even if ZEDEDA were to disappear, it's still there. Project Eve is still there. We still have a community of people maintaining it and supporting it. Became really attractive for us, and that's really what helped us cross the edge from saying, well, this is something nice technically, but is it sustainable? Is it something we should bet the farm on? And so that idea of an open source, vibrant open source community, that's kind of so foundational on Project Eve, really helped us make that decision. In addition to that, we know that this space is moving way too fast. That it's every few months there's some new thing being added or being discussed around the edge, And we know that from my experience that it's really very hard for a company to, to direct its focus without, and make sure that it still, keeps in touch with all the bits and pieces happening. So for us, the LF Edge community and the fact that we have different tiers of people, different stakeholders involved contributing means that Project Eve will remain fresh and relevant, And so that was another reason too that helped us make that decision, because we knew that, that community is always there to keep things real, and keep things not myopic.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, that's the, there's a lot of different degrees of open, and there's a lot of, we see a lot of folks talking about open, and it's there's closed open, where it's, hey, you can do anything you want with my APIs if you pay me money. And then you're kind of at the whim of what they do with that roadmap. Why we think, well, Linux Foundation in general, you hit the nail on the head, why it's important to be working not just in open source, but also vendor neutral open source with that governance around it, is that insurance policy that you're part of something bigger than any one company. So yeah, no, a great way to put it, and totally a key part of the value prop. From an Eve standpoint, I know you guys are working with Eve sort of indirectly through the commercial efforts that you're building. Anything in particular you'd like to see from Eve going forward in terms of a project? We're working on expanding to comprehend Kubernetes, but anything specific around Eve that you can think of, or?
Yes, so I think that one of the efforts you mentioned is really how to get Kubernetes baked in more, to Eve. So that's one that I think will open up opportunities. Even with Schlumberger, there are different groups that are looking for that to happen. So I think that's the right step there. The other thing, and it's more around not just Eve, but LF Edge in general, is there's a lot happening. I mean, the oil and gas industry is going through a revolution right now, and so being able to keep in touch with that, being able to keep in touch with the OSDU, for example, being able to get your foot into that open, because you don't normally see this in oil and gas. Oil and gas is not one that prides itself on being open, but right now they are. So it'd be really interesting to have that closer association between LF Edge and some of these open source systems, from the oil and gas perspective. And because again, a lot of these majors have invested a lot in cloud architectures, so how do we get LF Edge to work with some of these cloud technologies? Because there is no edge without a cloud, and there's no cloud without the edge. It doesn't make sense. So instead of having these two silos there, especially now the pendulum is moving towards the edge, how do we make sure that all the investment and the focus that these major oil companies like us and even the operators have made on the cloud, how do we make sure that that bridge, between the edge and the cloud is solidified? That's one aspect I'd like to see. The other aspect is really around, there's still a lot of fear from oil companies and oil service companies like us around open source. The 2019, I said, was just a seismic shock, because everybody was thinking, whoa, Schlumberger, can we do this? And yes, we have done it, but it still takes a while to bake in. And some of the fears around loss of IP, how do we contribute what is good for the community, but still keep something for ourselves to differentiate with our IP, So there's that kind of, conflict, in terms of, how to make that happen. There's also the how do we navigate this, the minefield between the permissive, licenses and the protective copyleft, licenses. How do we make sure that we don't get into this scenario where we've contributed, where we've taken something, we've added a bit of it, and then now all of a sudden, everything is exposed, right? So there's still that fear. Now, some of it is because, it's still new for us, but, it would be good to see LF Edge kind of either give examples or walk oil and gas companies through this, because it's still a fear that, when I talk to stakeholders, still a fear they have about, open source. And the last one is around security. How do we make sure that we are using some of these open source components, and how do we make sure that, they don't have bad stuff in them? Now, the argument could be made that it's open source, so you can look at the code. But again, if you have millions of lines of code, nobody's going to do that, right? So there's still that fear around that.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think that that notion around protecting IP while diving more into open source is I think a really key point. Is I've seen it's a little bit of a dance. When I got involved a lot more in open source a number of years ago, it kind of starts with a little bit of a stalemate between, the conversations are a little awkward. It's like, what are we? How much do we want to get in on this? We don't want to show our hand. We want to be careful about it, and it just takes a little bit of time to get that cadence going. And that's part of the reason to have these conversations, is just kind of understand, kind of current state, where you guys are headed and whatnot. But it is definitely kind of a new muscle to work for, I think, a lot of companies, a lot of industries. But once people get going, they start to realize, how do you maintain those boundaries? And security is a big one, of course, as well. Like there's also, there's the whole question about code and all that, and then there's also just, I think, misconceptions around security in terms of, oh, it's open source, it's a free for all, like, it's not secure. But then you look at the types of companies, very, very large companies, that are hinging a lot of their core development strategy around open source, and you, like you said, people can see the code. And so some of it is, there's a very legitimate concern. Some of it is, it's really about education, or a lot of it is about education. So we'll see that kind of build out over time. So anything else kind of that you'd like to add around where you guys are headed in terms of strategy, how that relates back? Any kind of closing thoughts?
So, I think going back to our CEO's comment, is that the future is digital for us. In fact, we've changed that from the future is digital to the current is digital. We that digital transformation journey is one that we've been preaching. We've had visions for, but it's happening now. It's been the timelines for that have just been compressed, right? And so with that now comes to focus on the edge. How do we make sure that we can feed this digital transformation monster with stuff from the edge? So I think that we're going to see, we will see a lot of focus now on the edge, and not just being able to have data aggregators on the edge, because that's been there, done that. Usually, how do we make sure we can do this at scale? How do we make sure we can do this with less people on the edge? Because we will have less people. That's not going to change. We'll have less people. So we need to find a way to make it more efficient and more scalable and more maintainable. And I always joke that if you can treat the edge as IT, we'll be golden. If we can take some of the IT concepts that we have on the cloud and move them to the edge, that will really help to operationalize and make it really fit for enterprise.
Yeah, it makes sense. One of the many sayings I have is, IoT starts in OT and scales in IT.
Exactly.
And yeah, so very, very true. So Obi, I really appreciate you spending the time with us. Yeah, also great comment about OSCU. Like, I know we're talking offline about that, is how do we get engaged in that forum. But yeah, really appreciate you spending the time and providing your insights to the community, and look forward to continuing to work with you going forward. So with that, I think we're at time. If you guys are wanting to dive in on the energy side, Benoit from RTE France will be up next. Just log out here and go in on the link for that session, which is in your swap card. Anything else, Brett, on your end?
No, this session, as noted at the beginning, was recorded. So if folks want to revisit this one or our earlier overview session, or the forthcoming sessions, they will be available shortly. So
where can we get the links? Sorry, the links to the
yeah, to the recording. Gavin, I think any comment on where the recordings will be hosted?
If you go back to the program on Swapcard, they'll be linked from there, so you can review them as you can review any presentation in the conference there. So, the foundation might also be doing something separately with the links as well. I think, Brett, you mentioned you might post them somewhere.
Yeah,
okay, a bunch of people emailed me. They were trying to join, but somehow from the LF Edge Summit site, they couldn't access this thing. So that's why you probably have, So you might work.
Yeah, we are having. Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah, we'll definitely promote the replay. But yeah, we're having some challenges with the links.
But yeah, we'll work the LF Edge YouTube channel. We'll work to put it up there as well, and share the link with everyone on the line.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, guys. It was good. Thanks, Jason. It was
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Obi.
Yeah.
Catch you later.
okay.
Thanks all.